Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. About 8 years ago, my girlfriends and I would download Plenty of Fish and meet random guys to take exploring with us. Definitely not the smartest, especially since we were out in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. This one night, we met a guy and let's call him Todd. Todd was an odd guy. He seemed socially distant, and when he slid into the back of my SUV, I instantly got the feeling of regret. We were going to a place called Roney's Point. It's a very interesting place, and you should look it up if you're into ghost and haunted history. Todd wanted to stay in the car for a bit to scope out the area while the girls went ahead to explore. Red flag. I was so sure that he was going to try and steal my car. We went into the abandoned hospital and out of nowhere, here comes Todd around the corner. He scared us so bad that we let out a slight scream. Todd started making comments about how his great-grandfather was a security guard at the asylum. It was right next to the hospital, and that his grandfather told him stories about how they would shoot out the sick individuals for fun. He laughed and said, "How much fun would that be?" And we continued to explore, and Todd just hung out in the background. We eventually left, and Todd insisted on sitting behind me in the car. I needed gas, so I started driving to the nearest gas station. And maybe 2 minutes up the winding road, I felt his slimy hands creep up and start massaging my shoulders while I'm driving. I kept leaning forward to give him the hint that I was not interested as he is massaging my shoulders. He's telling my friends and I how stupid we are for inviting random strangers out, how we never know who is getting in our car, and how they might hurt us, and etc. He started laughing again, and I will never forget the tone of his voice or the grip of his hands on my shoulders when he said, "Maybe that person's in the car with you right now." I then pulled into the gas station and I demanded that he got out of the car. He did, and I left him there. We got back home and my friend onto POF to block him, but he already blocked her or deleted his account. We never heard of him again, but we stopped inviting random people to urban explore and ghost hunt with us again. As a child, I did a lot of things that I shouldn't have. I skipped school, smoked, drank, argued with my parents, and I snuck out. I know what I did was wrong, and I don't have a reason for it either. I know now that my parents did their best though, and I understand that now, but at that time, I thought I knew what was best for me. Whenever I had fights with my parents, I would just leave. Sometimes, I would end up at my friend's house, maybe in a parking lot on a bench for a while, or even just sitting at the corner to calm down. But my favorite places to go were abandoned places. We had a lot of places that were abandoned, condemned, and left behind. Usually, my friends and I would find a place to call our own and smoke there and just hang out for several hours. This would turn out to be my plans one night after a fight with my dad. I got pissed off and I stormed off to my room. I grabbed my skateboard, my little backpack, I threw in some clothes, my flashlight, my wallet, and a few other things to ditch for a few days. It was summer at that time, so I figured that I would be out for a few days and then just come back home. I slipped out of the back door and I was on my way. I tried calling a few of my friends, and they said they were busy and couldn't get out due to other family plans. One of my friends welcomed me over but said that it would be a few hours before they got home, so I was on my own for a few. So I decided to just start riding around, thinking that I could at least head in the direction of my friend's house and just enjoy the cooler evening breeze. While on the way, I decided to take a back road that basically went behind some apartments and out to the other side. And while back there, I remembered one of the complexes nearby had caught fire, and I decided to look for it. It turns out I was off on the name, and I found the property a few blocks over. It was obviously evacuated and had boards on the windows, but it was still standing. I decided, why not check it out and kill some time while I was at it? I was around 16 or 17 at that time, and I was a petite girl, so I could easily fit into small places. But that means I also wasn't very strong, and I couldn't break down boards, windows, or doors, so I had to find a more discreet way to get in. It turns out there was an emergency exit with stairs going down the side of the building, which still seemed to be intact, so I left my skateboard at the bottom, and then I climbed up the stairs to the door, and with there just being a no trespassing sign on the door, I just opened it, and I went in. When I entered, I could immediately smell the remnants of the fire, the smoky smell, burnt wood, an old building falling apart. There were several doors going down the hall. Some of the doors were opened, and some of them appeared to be locked or jammed. And walking around the open rooms, you could tell where the fire was the worst. And seeing some of the items people left behind or couldn't take was really kind of sad. Old clothes, pictures, children's toys. I guess it almost worked on me, thinking back to my stuff and my family and things that I would have hated to lose too. I continued to walk through what I could until I got to the center stairs. I started walking down them, and when I swung around to go down the second set, I noticed a figure standing at the bottom of the stairs, and it scared the hell out of me, making me scream. When the person didn't even budge, it scared me even more, so I just slowly backed up when he said, "Wait." His voice alone was unsettling. It sounded like the guy from Sling Blade was losing his voice. Not a good story as is, so sounding like the guy did not make me any more comfortable. I stopped, with one foot on the stairs on the other side of the railing, and I looked at him. I waited for him to say something when he finally asked, "What are you doing on my property?" I told him that I was sorry, and I made up a story about how my friend used to live here and that she lost something, and I thought that I would look since I was in the area. He saw right through my lies and called me out on it too. I didn't know what else to do other than apologize, and I said that I didn't mean to disrupt you or disrespect your property and that I would leave now. However, he stopped me again and said, "I'll make a deal with you. If you do me a favor, I'll let you go and I won't call the cops on you for breaking in." A little curious and dumb, I asked him what the favor was. He let out a chuckle and slowly started unzipping his pants. I flipped out. I quickly ran back up the stairs as this guy ran after me. I got to the door, and as I was leaving, he managed to yank me back in by my backpack. At this point, the guy was in my face smiling and said, "So, should I call the cops?" I don't know what got over me, but I said something along the lines of, "Well, my friends are right outside with cameras, so if you'd like them to record what you're asking a minor to do, be my guest." And right as he started loosening his grip, my knee went straight up, and he went straight down. I ran out of the door quickly, down the stairs, grabbed my skateboard, and I ran down the street. There was a 24-hour fitness center and a little further down, so I went in and I asked to sit in their lobby while I waited on my friend. They finally picked me up and I told them what happened. They were impressed at how I was able to get away, but I was still freaking out inside. I didn't tell anyone where I was, not my parents nor my friend that was picking me up, and if I wasn't so lucky, who knows what may have happened to me. From then on, I don't explore on my own, and I'm more aware of how much I take with me in those places as well. Travel light, pay attention to your surroundings, and tell someone where you're going to be at all times. Back in the late 2000s, me and my then boyfriend, Omer, were taking an impromptu road trip. We just wanted to get away, so we just set off heading east in whatever direction we were pulled to and stopped at places that we were drawn to. We didn't have a lot of money, so we slept in our car a lot, which was fine, as it gave us more time to look around and go to places. However, our idea of places to go also included urban exploring. It was fun enough finding places local to explore, but even better when it's out of state, places you've never been to or heard of, and going in blind. We were driving through Mississippi at that time when our car started having issues and overheating. Thankfully, we were near an exit, so we got off the freeway. With our hazards on, we slowly drove into the closest parking lot of a Sonic and turned the car off. We had to figure out what was wrong with our car, and most likely without moving it, so we got directions to a nearby gas station and started walking. I was so incredibly thankful that it was September, so it wasn't very hot. On our way there, we noticed what looked like this big old house with a fenced-in yard, till we started looking at it more. It was actually an old church that looked like it had been closed or abandoned for a while. At that moment, we could read each other's minds. We knew we were going to be staying in this little town for the night. We got to the gas station where they thankfully sold antifreeze and then started our walk back. On our way, we looked around to see if there was anyone watching. We checked for no trespassing signs and looked for the best ways in. However, the best way in would turn out to be the front gate that didn't have a lock or a sign on it. Once we got back to our car, we poured in the antifreeze and thankfully, that seemed to help. We decided to eat while we were there, and then we left to find a good place to leave the car while we went exploring. Turns out, there was a small motel not far off from the church, so we agreed to park it there. It was already evening when we first pulled into Sonic, so we didn't have to wait much longer till it got dark. And once we were good and didn't see anyone loitering around the motel, I emptied my purse, so all we had on me was my pepper spray and my flashlight, and then we left. As we walked to the church, we opened the gate and quickly ran up to the door to get in quickly. The door looked like someone did a poor attempt at boarding it up, but missed one whole side of the frame as we could slip through and inside easily. And once in, I immediately noticed how creepy the main hall was. There was spray paint on the walls that said, "Welcome." It looked like someone had taken the boards that covered the windows and made a sign that again said something like, "She welcomes all here." Weird, but probably people that snuck in trying to make a church creepier than they were. We walked over to the right that had a couple of rooms. It looked like it was for children based on the decorations and the bright colored paint that was peeling off from the wall. The first room to have a really old TV in it, but the actual center of it was busted out. There were a few toys and a small chest in the back, as well as a little cubby shelf with different names on it. Don't get me wrong, I love doing this, but seeing places like this with a name attached to it gives me somewhat of a weird feeling. It makes it more real or brings it back to life in a sense. I then proceeded down to the next room, which was when things started to get weird. The room had been stripped. The cubbies and the shelf on the wall had been ripped out, and the light fixtures and the wiring seemed completely gone. The carpet had started being ripped up where it could be, leaving the bare wooden floor underneath. But the creepy part was in the middle of the room. There was a pile of toys, or rather things. More specifically, it looked like anything with a face. Dolls, cars with faces, VHS tapes with faces on it, the clock with literal hands in it and eyes, all anything that you could think of. However, it was all red. It looked like someone had poured buckets of red paint on this stuff and then just left it. I thought that once again, it was just someone trying to be creepy, so I just laughed. As Omar and I started walking to check out the other side, we could smell something that was like an incense or a candle. Going further in the hallway though, we couldn't smell it, and we definitely couldn't smell it on the other side either. Curious to know what it was though, we decided to go to the only other place left, which appeared to be the main chapel area. We slowly creaked the doors open and went in cautiously. This is where we became a little more on alert. At the altar, we could see what looked like lit candles. Omar was hesitant to continue at first, worried that someone could be in here, but it wasn't that big, and I couldn't see anyone from where I was, so we agreed to walk further in together. As we did, I started to notice weird symbols on the walls, and they appeared to be written in red paint, just like the room we first saw. Omar then pointed at the pews that also had the symbols all over them. I was starting to get some weird vibes from this place at this point. I had never seen the symbols before. I was far from being well versed in different religions, but these seemed more cryptic. However, the altar is where I waved the flag. From the entrance, I could see the candles, but I couldn't really make out anything else up there. And once we approached it, there was a pew that was up there, but still facing the same way. I was startled at first because there was a tarp over it, and it looked like someone was under it. Omar softly kicked the pew to see if whatever was under there would budge. When nothing happened, he slowly pulled the tarp back, and I almost got sick. It looked like a pig that had been dead for a very long time, which explained why we couldn't really smell anything. The podium, though, had a disturbing framed picture on it. It was a naked woman that looked like she had a long cut from her neck to her belly button. She looked like she was sitting on one of these pews, legs straight down and crossed at the ankles, and arms stretched out across the backrest. However, she was alive and smiling. The podium also had what we were smelling. It was an incense that was almost out, and the candles we saw were those fake battery ones. At this point, we were on edge. This meant someone had to have been here, and recently. Omar didn't want to stick around anymore, and I certainly didn't want to get to know anyone that did this, so we bounced. We quickly, and as quietly as we could, went right back out the front door. Omar had me go out the door first, and when I turned back to hold the boards open some, I noticed he was looking to the left. I told him to come on when he finally walked out and pushed me towards the gate. And once we got out, we took off to our car. When I thought we were just going to chill for a bit, he actually drove off. He said that he would feel more comfortable if he got away from there. He didn't talk much while he was driving, so I did a lot of the talking, trying to make jokes about what we saw to lighten the mood. I think we went a few more exits before we ended up at another hotel. And after we slept that night and headed off the next morning, it was at that time that he finally told me what was wrong. He thought he had heard a noise when we were leaving, and when he looked over, he saw a man in a dark blue parka-looking thing, holding a huge knife, just watching us leave. He wasn't comfortable staying there in case they came looking for us, and that's why we left. He hadn't said anything to me because he didn't want me to worry. I was okay with that too, but I felt bad that he had to carry that on his own, but I am thankful that he was watching out for us. We still like to do this, and it hasn't stopped us since, but if we see something even remotely off, it's not worth the risk, so we leave. Thankfully, we haven't run into any more pigs since then. Back in the 90s, my friend Brent and I would go exploring old buildings that were abandoned or condemned just for fun. We didn't have cell phones at that time, and the most we had was his car, so trespassing and sneaking out alcohol was the most excitement we could really have. We lived in Topeka, Kansas at that time, and if you're from there, you know there's a small area to have fun in and another that's just boring. Or maybe that was just us since we lived on the boring side. Either way, this was our idea of fun. With empty houses or buildings to explore, we had plenty of new places to choose from. One place in particular that we had been wanting to check out was the Topeka State Hospital. It had been closed for a while, and with all the rumors of previous patients haunting the place, we desperately wanted to check it out. We also had never explored in a place so big, so we had to try and figure out the best way to get in and when to do it. We drove by it a couple of times to see if there was any type of security around it and to see if there was anything immediate that would hinder us. And where we were convinced that it was going to be an easy in, all we had to do was find a time to do it. So to not have our parents asking questions about what we were doing, we told them that we would be staying at each other's house and then have the night without any suspicion. Friday night came, and Brent said that he was leaving to come over to my place, and I told my parents that he was coming to pick me up, and then we were off. We each had a backpack with what our parents thought were our clothes, toothbrush, and deodorant, while in reality, it had our flashlights, a few supplies we brought, like a pocket knife just in case, and a few snacks to eat while we waited. We learned over time, the fewer things we brought, the better, especially if we needed to get out quickly and ditch our bags. We parked several feet up from the building to try to make it not look so suspicious, and then we sat in the car and ate. We thought we'd kind of scope out the place to see if anyone came by and to get any last-minute jitters out of us. And after about half an hour, we decided that it was time to go now before we chickened out. We approached the building, and not to our surprise, the front door was completely locked and boarded up. So we walked around to the side, seeing if there was any other way in, when Brent noticed a window that had been broken out and haphazardly boarded up with a "No Trespassing" sign attached to it. Now, the boards weren't the best, so it was pretty easy to pry it off just with our hands and a little hammer that we had with us. So, Brent went in first and then helped me in, and that was the start of a very long night. Once we were in, we turned on our flashlight, put on our backpacks, and started looking around. Immediately, the smell hit me. It was very musty, like what a damp old room would smell like. The paint or the wallpaper was eerily peeling on the walls, but the oddest part for me was how still the air was. I motioned to Brent to stop for a second, just to try and listen, and the only thing you could hear was our slight breaths. You couldn't even hear the sounds of the bugs outside. It was just one of those moments that was hard to explain. However, we didn't want to waste a lot of time, and then we started moving on. We looked through the rooms where the doors were already open and saw much of what you would expect. Bare shelves, broken bed frames and chairs. The restroom stalls were all broken and some of the toilets just busted. There was a lot of graffiti everywhere too, so obviously we weren't the only ones that had been here. As we looked around and just took in all that we were seeing, we heard what sounded like someone walking slowly above us. A little scared but also not ready to leave yet, we decided to go up to the second floor to check it out. The stairs were not something that I'd want to walk on more than once, but the railing seemed sturdy enough. We made our way up there to see more of the same. Creepy dark hallways, spray-painted doors and walls, and those yellow file folders scattered on the ground. And while here, we again heard more footsteps but nothing else with it. We were just about to head up to the third floor when Brent turned around to look down the hall that we were just at. Nothing there again, and we got this far without anyone showing up, so we wanted to get all the way to the top. We climbed the stairs to the third floor where we were greeted with the door slamming this time. I think Brent was a little fed up at this point, with us both not being faced by ghost stories, or at least not willing to admit it, so he shouted, "We're not here to harm anyone or anything." And after wincing at hearing him unexpectedly calling out, we waited in silence but heard nothing, not even the footsteps. We both let out a quiet laugh and then continued on. Looking around the rooms, I saw some really old clothes that looked like they had been disintegrating over time, just sitting in the corner of a room. In the same room, I started smelling sulfur. It was almost like there were fireworks going off right in front of me. I walked out of the room quickly and across to where Brent was, who claimed he didn't smell anything at first. I brought him over to the other room where he could then smell it. As we started leaving the room though, the door to the room he was in slowly closed. As I mentioned earlier, there was no airflow in this place. It was still. So there was no way a draft blew this door shut. We stared at the door for several minutes when we started hearing the footsteps again, but they seemed to be quicker than before and getting louder. We walked over by the stairs slowly and waited. That's when I felt a really cold breeze brush my back, and I very clearly heard the word, "Out," whispered in my ear. I was done. I took off down the stairs, Brent following right behind me, and when I got to the bottom, I leaped out of the window we came through and waited as Brent crouched down to do the same. As he was doing this, it sounded like someone was running towards us. I yelled at Brent to hurry up when he nearly dived out the window to get out, and we quickly took off to his car, not caring if anyone saw us, and just sat in the car, staring at this place for several more minutes to calm down. After a while, we both asked each other if we heard the voice, and that's why we both started running. So at least I know I wasn't the only one. As mentioned, I didn't really believe in the paranormal. But after that experience and reading more about what took place there, I can definitely believe former patients are sadly trapped in there. Brent and I still remember this, but we have not told a single person about it, but have kept this as a personal experience that we will never forget. I've been delivering food for one of those popular gig companies that you all know and love. The ones that will charge you way too much just to have McDonald's delivered to your house. Since I've been doing it for quite a while, I've seen a lot of strange and creepy things, and I've dealt with what I would consider the most terrifying people out there. Some of my favorites are the ones where the person that you're delivering to comes to the door smelling like death or not wearing enough clothing. To add to that aside, please, when you order food from a pizza place through Uber or DoorDash or whatever, please wear clothes, and please wear enough clothes to cover yourself. I can't tell you how many naked people I've seen through open curtains, or when they open the door to get their no-contact order. Well, anyways, moving past my complaints about people having no modesty at all, one of the other things we tend to run into are crazy people. Sometimes, you get people that have pretty clear mental issues, and I understand that a lot of them cannot control their mannerisms, and maybe that's what was wrong with this lady. But honestly, this situation scared the absolute hell out of me. This happened last year during the COVID-19 situation. And as stated, I was a driver for one of the companies that delivered food to people from random restaurants. This was near the beginning when we were still able to hand you your food, but then we also had the option to do the no-contact delivery. When we do the no-contact, we were still expected to make sure that the customer got their food. Basically, we were supposed to drop the order on the porch, ring the bell, and then step away to around 6 to 10 feet and wait a moment for the customer. I was very specific with how I did things. I wasn't one to just drop the food and then run back to my car. This order was a decent-sized order from a bar and grill, which was fine. I drove to the restaurant, got the food, and then headed out toward the customer's house. I was heading down the street and approaching the destination when I noticed the overall appearance of the neighborhood was starting to decrease. And by this, I mean that the houses went from pretty normal suburban homes to a bit run down, all the way to some of the houses looking really bad, and I would go as far as saying trashy. I was driving to the end of the road, and I was trying to find the house that I needed to deliver to, and honestly, I was starting to get one of those pits in my stomach. The last couple houses went as such. One house looked like kind of okay. One house was completely and totally trashed and looked like a drug house. And the last house looked decent. Looking at these three, I was honestly scared that the drug house was going to be where I had to deliver. So imagine my surprise when it wasn't, and the number matched the cleaner of the three houses. So I parked my car in front of the house and I grabbed the food, making my way up to the porch. As expected, I drop the order on the porch and I ring the bell. I then stand back and wait for the customer. Within a few seconds of my ringing the bell, I hear the door next door, the door at the drug-looking house. It flings open hard and then smacks against the siding. Obviously, this caught my attention, so I looked over to see what was going on, and I really wish that I hadn't. out of the door comes a woman that had a look about her that was nothing shy of horrifying. She looked like she was genuinely pissed off at the world and like she wanted to hurt someone. And at that point in time, the only person nearby and the only person making eye contact was me. Out of nowhere, she yells, "What the hell are you doing? And what do you want?" I immediately looked up to the customer's door to wait for them to answer, and I tried to move on from that situation. I reached forward and ring the doorbell a second time and stepped back to my waiting position. Then out of nowhere, I get this incredibly sharp pain in my leg. I didn't think much of it, but when I look down, I see a screwdriver handle sticking out of my leg, and this crazy woman standing there and staring at me like I was literally the cause of every problem she's ever had. And the only solution was to stab me with a rusty screwdriver from her junk pile. I honestly cannot overstate how awkward this situation was. Yes, I had a screwdriver sticking out of my leg, and yes, I was starting to bleed some, and yes, she had seriously just stabbed me. But something about the moment of silence between us was just awkward. What exactly do you say to some crazy woman that stabbed you with a screwdriver while you were just delivering food to their neighbor? After a few seconds of silence, the customer opened the door and reached for their food, and almost grabbed it to go back in until he saw me, the neighbor, and the screwdriver. He dropped his food and ran out to the yard and basically stepped forward to get in between me and his neighbor. I don't really remember much between that moment and when the whole thing came to an end. I know that the neighbor was screaming that she had just stopped me from robbing him, and then the customer was screaming about something. I just remember feeling woozy and asking for them to call an ambulance, and for some reason, randomly thinking about how I wasn't going to mark my delivery as finished. If anyone's curious, yes, the cops came, and yes, I ended up in the hospital. Getting stabbed with a rusted and weathered screwdriver is something that they want you to get checked out for. I'm pretty sure she got arrested for this situation, but I don't really know because the officers never spoke to me about this situation. I did go back to delivering when I could. I just now have a bit of a limp and a nice circular scar where she stabbed me. I answered the door for a guy who was dressed as a UPS driver. It had the logo on his jacket and everything. I assumed that my parents had ordered something that I needed to sign for, so I answered it. But after opening the door and greeting him, I realized that not only did he not have anything for me, but there wasn't even a UPS truck in sight. He told me his name was Tony and that he was selling lawn care services around the neighborhood. I started to figure out that maybe he was just a UPS worker who forgot to change clothes before starting his second job as a landscaper or maybe a gardener. But then, he started asking me weird questions, like if we had any security cameras or large dogs in our house. We do have security cameras, but they are quite hidden. I told him that we did not, and even though our largest dog is a 1-year-old beagle, I told him that we have 2 pit bulls. This entire time, he wasn't looking at me. He was almost looking around me, letting his eyes coast around the inside of my house, probably looking for visible signs of something valuable. He then asked me the weirdest question. He asked why I had my door cracked instead of opened all the way. I lied, and I said it was because I didn't want my pit bulls to see him and then start going nuts. Well, the truth is, I always do this when I answer the door for strangers, so I can close it as fast as possible should they try something. He then gave me a poorly made flyer for his supposed lawn care business, and then went off down the street to the next house. I shut my door and I locked all of the locks on it. Tony, I hope that I don't see you on the news anytime soon. So the setting is 2015. My sister and I are home alone watching Craigslist horror stories on YouTube. A bit ironic, I know. And now for reference, I was 13 while my sister was 17, and having these watch parties had become something of a habit as it was our last year together before she went off to college. We lived in a safe neighborhood, and nothing had ever really happened at that point that would give us any reason to be anxious about being alone. Well, anyways, time goes on, and my sister suggests that we ordered pizza since she was starving. I'm not one to turn down a pizza, so I naturally agree, and we place an order at a local pizza place. We continue watching our videos for another 15 to 20 minutes before I step out to use the restroom. And just then, I hear the doorbell ring followed by my sister getting up to go and answer it. So I carry on with my business with the assumption that it was just the pizza. But I'd say only 2 minutes had passed as I come back and I realized that my sister was still at the door talking to someone. I couldn't really make out what was being said, but I knew it was definitely a man's voice responding to her. As I go to see what was going on, my sister promptly shuts the door, pizza in hand. I initially assumed maybe there was just an issue with the payment, so I just tease my sister for taking so long and I go sit down. It didn't take long for me to realize that my sister wasn't eating despite this whole thing being her idea. And even more so, she had a very nervous look on her face now, and she wasn't really speaking much. I asked her what was up, and she proceeds to tell me that when she opened the door to greet the pizza guy, he looked at her as if he was checking her out and followed up by giving her the most unsettling smile that she has ever seen. She was just trying to get the pizza and go, as she had already paid online, but the creep insisted on trying to make conversation with her. The man pretended to fumble around trying to get the pizza box out of his bag, all the while asking very personal questions that he certainly had no business asking, like how old she was and if she was alone. Now, I admittedly thought that she was just messing with me. I mean, stuff like that can never actually happen to people you know, right? But nevertheless, it still left me feeling a bit anxious. We tried to enjoy the food and then move on, and I'd say about an hour or two later, we had finally calmed down about the whole thing. Right as we were getting ready to clean up and go back to our own rooms, there was a knock at the door, a very loud and aggressive one at that. We shared the same nervous look, then hesitantly slipped over to a window to see if we can get a look at whoever's knocking. Now, I hadn't seen the guy, but my sister immediately recognized him as the pizza guy from before. We were contemplating calling the police, but the guy only knocked once or twice before getting in his car and taking off way too fast down the road. Almost like he knew that if he continued, he was more than likely going to end up in a lot of trouble. We made a round around the house, making sure everything was locked up, and then we waited for what felt like ages for our parents to finally get home. My sister told them about what happened, but my mother insisted that we were just being dramatic, that we had just made ourselves nervous because of the videos that we were always watching. While we both initially insisted on being serious, we eventually just gave up and tried to move on from the whole thing. We ordered from that place a few more times, but thankfully, we never saw that same delivery man again. Nothing else ever came of the situation, but I can't help but think about what could have happened if that creep had been just a bit more persistent. What if he kept trying to get into the house? Or what if we accidentally left the door unlocked? I think his intentions were obvious, and I can only hope that his behavior has caught up with him, and that he's somewhere out there getting the help that he mostly definitely needs. For some context, I live in a major city, and I currently don't do a lot of driving due to the ongoing issues with my car, plus the pandemic has made me turn to more delivery apps in general. So the other day around 1 p.m., I decided to order some lunch after doing a lot of cleaning. I placed the Uber Eats order, and I found something to watch while I waited for the food. Within a few minutes, a driver accepted the order, and I noticed right away that the driver, Anthony, was on a bike. It didn't have a profile picture or any deliveries on record. At first, I wasn't alarmed at all. I was almost amused, like, "Oh, wow, guess I'm this person's first ever customer." But then a full 30-minute passes with no driver movement on the app, and at this point, I think maybe something is glitching out or the driver is stuck. I contact support via the chat option, and they ended up assigning a new driver because they couldn't reach the first one. It was odd, but whatever. Now is when it starts getting a little weirder. The new driver assigned is in the exact same spot as the original driver was, and they are also on a bike. They also have no profile picture and have no prior deliveries as well. And this driver's name was Lori. I let another 20 minutes pass with no driver movement before I messaged them myself and say, Hi there. Are there any issues with my order?" And the app shows that the driver saw the message, but there was no response. All this time, I'm checking to see if Uber Eats is maybe experiencing some issues, none that I could find, and at this point, while I'm definitely weirded out, I'm mostly just hungry, so I contact support again to request some assistance. They reassigned the driver again and apologized for the inconvenience. It was the same deal. They also tried to contact the driver, but there was no response. Finally, the third driver assigned is the exact same scenario, same spot, on a bike, no profile picture, and no prior deliveries. Only this time, the name is Robert, and before I can react and go about canceling the order at this point, because I'm just really tired of dealing with this, he suddenly has my food and immediately messages me the following. "Hello, I have your food. What's your phone number?" And I responded right away with, "I'm not super comfortable giving my phone number out when you can just message me here." And he responded again with, "What's your number? I'll be there in 10. How old are you?" And at this point, alarm bells are going off, and I contact support immediately to have the order canceled and get further assistance. I get connected to Uber's safety team, who informs me that the order has been cancelled and I'll be refunded, and I started taking down the details of the strange interactions. As I'm giving the woman on the phone the info she needs, I'm starting to calm down, thinking that this was just some creep or something. And that's when I hear a man's voice at the front door. "Miss Metal Gear 42069, I have your food." And I can't even describe the chill that went down my spine because of the way he said it. Making things even worse, the Uber safety woman on the phone with me heard this as well and goes, "Is that him? We canceled the order." I poked my head around the door. My main heavy door was open, but the metal screen door was closed and locked, but allowed us to see each other. And then I get a look at him. And when he saw me on the phone, he went from smiling to looking furious. He suddenly got right up against the door and kept asking who I was on the phone with. And at this point, I've started asking him to please leave because he is making me uncomfortable and he's getting more and more angry. And at this point, he starts pounding on my door and grabbing the doorknob while shouting to be let in. The woman on the phone is asking if I'm okay, and the man is still shouting. So basically, I'm in a full meltdown mode, and at this point, I hurriedly close the heavy door to lock it. The man is becoming borderline belligerent as he kicks my door, and the woman tells me to call the police. He ended up walking away from my house about a minute after that and back up to the sidewalk. And for a moment, I thought that he messed up, so I finished my conversation with the Uber safety woman so she could submit the report. Once she submitted it, I called the police and I told them what happened. They weren't incredibly helpful at first since he didn't actually break in or put his hands on me. And they told me that if he came back, just to call again, and they would send an officer out. I did end up having to call them again and then give a full report, plus the description of the man since he didn't end up leaving right away. He stayed in the neighborhood for almost 20 minutes. According to one of my neighbors, after she heard the yelling, she saw the man that I described walk back up from my house to the sidewalk and then hop into a truck with another man in the passenger seat. And they apparently just sat there staring at people walking by and being incredibly sketchy. And that's when she walked back towards my house and asked me what happened. Luckily, she was able to give myself and the cop a description of the vehicle and the other man as well. So basically, this was a very bizarre and uncomfortable experience, and I wanted to share it to maybe see if anyone has ever experienced anything like this. Because honestly, I'm still pretty shaken up, and I will be avoiding delivery apps for quite a while. So, strange Uber Eats driver who asked me for personal info and then proceeded to try and break in. Please, let's not meet. I've been a nurse at our local hospital for the last 8 years. If you're here long enough, you will come across a few ghost stories, and maybe even experience one yourself. I definitely had my share since being there, and I can name a few that were especially memorable. I will start by saying that it doesn't help that the hospital used to be an orphanage many years ago as well. So, the main one we hear about is the children of death. We call them this because when a patient sees one of these kids, they end up passing away soon after. A couple of examples was one gentleman that another nurse walked in on as he was talking to someone, but there was no one in the room. The nurse asked him who he was talking to, and he said that the young girl that just left. He said that she had brought in a card, and he pointed at it. The nurse said that she looked at it, and it looked like a young child's drawing of a person surrounded by flowers and people crying. We had no idea where it came from, as he hadn't had any visitors that day. We even checked the logs, and his son came to see him the day prior, but no one today, and his son didn't have any young kids. A few days later, the man passed away in his sleep. He was there due to a heart attack, but he seemed to be improving. Another instance was an older lady that was there after breaking her hip. She said that she was a medium, so she was always entertaining us nurses on duty. She gave us all readings and told us some interesting stories of past readings that she had done. And every once in a while, she might ask to pass condolences on to someone there that recently lost someone, be it another patient or even our head nurse once. Her father had died suddenly, and we, the nurses, didn't really talk much about it, but this lady had brought it up. I thought she must have heard someone mention it. However, there was one instance where we received a nurse call to her room, and upon entering, she asked that we check on the woman across the hall. She claimed that she saw her walk out of the room holding the hand of a little girl. This was in the geriatric ward, so the patient didn't have a heart monitor attached, and she was bedridden because she was very frail and couldn't get up on her own. We dashed over to her room to see that she had passed away. We were shocked because while we were expecting that she would pass soon, we had no idea when, nor did we know how this other patient would have known. She couldn't have left her room, and there was no kids on this floor. So, of course, we had to go back and ask her about it. She said the lady looked spry and happy and believed that the little girl was helping her move on to the afterlife. We thought at first that maybe it was one of the children that other patients have seen, but she said that she was wearing modern clothing, a pink flowery dress with a huge flower in her hair. We thought it was a crazy situation, but we just let it go. And later on, after the older woman's daughter came in to get her mom's belongings, the medium was being wheeled back to her room by another nurse when she stopped this daughter to speak to her. After giving her condolences for her mother's passing, she brought up that she saw her as she passed over and began asking her, the daughter, about her own daughter. She started crying and was shocked that she had brought it up. Apparently, her daughter had died after being hit by a car while riding her bike a few years prior. She said that she was buried in her favorite pink floral dress with a matching flower clip. She also said that her daughter and her mom became very close as she was her first grandkid, and when they lost her, it broke her heart. I thought maybe she recognized this woman from the news or something, but how could she have known what she was wearing when she was buried? I don't believe in mediums, but the fact that the little girl that this woman appeared to be walking out of the room with matched her granddaughter made me a little less skeptical. I used to do overnight IT work for a handful of hospitals in a small town in the Midwest that if I mentioned it, you would have no idea where it was. That said, I'm just going to say that it was in Nebraska, and I will leave it at that. It was a contract work, and it was outsourced to a third-party company, I was just out of my 2-year degree, so I took the first job that I got offered. As previously stated, that first job happened to be a contract-to-hire position, doing the third shift help desk for a group of hospitals. Basically, I would be expected to be at one of the sites and answer support tickets for this main site, as well as the satellite offices if they came in, which they rarely did. For the most part, I would have to spend all my hours at the main hospital and sit in the IT room from midnight to 8 in the morning, doing very little. There would be the occasional printer that I would have to reset or fix for the overnight nurses, but really, it was such a simple job. Now, I should have to tell you this, but hospitals are typically haunted, and I don't mean like, ooh, that's spooky, kinda haunted. No. I mean straight up haunted by the spirits of the people that died in the rooms and cannot pass on. Honestly, I could probably sit here and type a short novel of all the events that happened, but I think it's best to go with the ones that seriously spooked me. There was one night where I got a ticket for one of the aforementioned printers, which honestly were more hassle than they were worth. I got called down to help one of the station nurses connect her system to the main printer because it just kept giving her an error. I get down there, she tells me what exactly the printer is doing, and then asks how long it will take. I tell her that it will only be a few minutes, and she informs me that she needs to use the restroom. I tell her that it would be fine and that I should have it done by the time that she gets back. She then walks away and I get to work. After a few moments, I get that weird feeling that someone is staring at me. You know that feeling, that spine chill. I shrug it off and I keep trying to get the drivers installed for the printer, when I hear someone faintly say, "Excuse me." I look up and then I see an elderly patient standing in the doorway to their room and staring at me, which honestly wasn't that big of a deal. I was sitting at the nurse station and I was the only person standing there. I looked up and as politely as I could, I said, "Oh, my apologies. I'm just here to help with the computer. The nurse on duty went to the restroom, but I'll let her know that you need help as soon as she gets back." I say this, and she smiles at me with a wrinkly beaming smile, and I think everything is copacetic between us. I sit back down, and I start back into getting the hunk of junk back to a functional state. After a few moments of me working with it, I get it to connect, and it starts spinning up as the spooler pulls the job. I patted myself on the back for another successful night, and then I lean back in the chair. I glanced back toward where the elderly lady was and saw that she had closed her door. As soon as I notice this, the nurse on duty comes back. I stand up, I let her know that everything is working again and that it looked like it wasn't going to cause her any more trouble. And I then motioned toward the room where the patient was, and I informed her that the nice old lady needed some assistance. When I said this, her face literally went pale, and she asked me which room. I pointed to the room with the door closed, and I told her that one. She then asked me to describe the old woman. I laugh, and I tell her that she had glasses, short white hair, looked to be in her 80s or something. And as soon as I tell her this, she shows me what it was that she printed. It was paperwork that she needed to fill out for a recently deceased patient. The picture of the patient was the woman that was standing in the doorway. She then tells me that this patient had passed away earlier that evening and that they had just cleared her room. Obviously, I thought she was pulling one over on me, and I playfully told her to knock it off. She stared at me with a deadpan stare and walked over to the room. Then she opened the door and motioned for me to look. I reluctantly did, and sure enough, it was empty. The room was sanitized, everything was clean, and the board was blank. Honestly, that kind of ruined that night, and I just grabbed my laptop and I went back to the ID closet. I didn't really want to deal with people after that one. Beyond that, and probably one of the other nights that scared the hell out of me, there was one evening where I was in the closet with one of my new co-workers that I was training. This was a year later after I was hired on full-time, and I was actually training this person to be under me. I had already explained how things worked, and he was sitting there going through the HR video training. And I was probably on Facebook just waiting for a ticket to come in, so we had something to do. We were literally just sitting there in the quiet hum of the servers when out of nowhere, the lights in the server room shut off. My mind immediately went into the worst case scenario. I thought that the server room lost power, which would have been bad. Server rooms losing power means that the server may shut off, and we have to manually check them all to make sure that they turn back on with emergency power and that there were no errors. I look around and see that the server rack still has green lights on it, which means that they were still all good to go. I told the new guy to wait there, and I got up to go and see if the rest of the hospital lost power. When I got to the door, the switch was off, like someone had literally turned it off. I shrugged it off and I flipped the switch back to on. The newbie asked if everything is okay, and as soon as I start telling him that it was nothing, the lights seriously flipped back off. I slowly turn around, turn them back on, and then start to walk backwards, back toward the desk. And I seriously watched the light switch slowly move from the on position to the off position. It was like a really weak person was slowly pushing it with one finger, just nudging it slightly down until it was off. Well, this was enough for me, and I told the new guy that we were taking a lunch. He laughed and asked what was going on, and I told him that at the exact moment we were going to leave the server room and go down to the cafeteria to take a lunch. I had no idea what the hell kind of spirit was having fun with us that night, but I wasn't going to agitate it any further. I just decided to let it have its way. We went down and had lunch, then went back up to the server room. And when we got there, the lights were back on, and they didn't turn themselves off after that. And while that may not be creepy to some people, it seriously freaked me out, mostly because I was well aware of how haunted that hospital really was. This happened in my childhood home. It was a very old house, and it had a lot of history since there are still literal bullet holes from the war in the walls of some of the older parts. Just to give you an idea of our floor plan, my bedroom is just to the right of a screen door leading to the bathroom. So, when you go in or out of the bedroom, you always have a peek at this screen door. Whenever I come out of our bedroom, I always see a shadow peeking at me from that screen door. Nothing malevolent. It just always looks like someone is standing just to the side of that door on the other side and leaning into it so that it could peek into the other parts of the house. I can only see it through peripheral vision, and it looks like a grown man. Whenever I turn my head to look directly at it, It doesn't just disappear. It hides to the side behind the screen door. It physically hides so I won't see it, like it was caught doing something that it wasn't supposed to. This has happened more than once to me, and that's what it always does, just peeking in. Some of my siblings have mentioned to me that they have also seen it, before I even brought it up to them. So I know that it's not just me. I don't investigate whenever I see it hide to the side, because that's what people in the horror movies usually do before they get killed off. I don't know what it is, but compared to the other things that we have experienced, it seems to be the less creepier inhabitant of our house. It was a normal day on the job. Nothing for me to report, not even speeders. It was about 2 p.m., so most people were at their jobs and kids were at school. In the force, we consider this the calm in the day, as there was rarely any crimes around this time. It's usually around the early hours of the day, between 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., when things tend to get crazy. But today wasn't one of those days. We got a call about a suspicious person near a North Park high school. And while we get these kinds of calls from time to time from overly concerned parents, we are required to follow up on the call just in case. Me and my partner Jeremy parked the car in the parking lot and proceeded to survey the area. We had checked the surrounding area until we heard an alarm coming from inside the school. A lockdown alarm. In Ontario, we have alarms for when a potentially dangerous person or animal is in the building, and then they go on lockdown, locking doors and turning off the lights to pretend that no one is there. At that moment, I no longer doubted the suspicious person report as we both jogged quickly to the door. As we reached it, we called in our location and the situation. We were told to wait for backup to arrive. As Jeremy communicated with dispatch, I pressed myself to the glass to see if there was any sort of information to be had. And looking in, I noticed the door on the other side of the building looked odd. Looking closer, I noticed the glass seemed to have been broken. I immediately told my partner before moving over to secure the point of entry, and as I reached the other side of the building, I saw broken glass and blood everywhere. Was it the assailants? I kept my gun drawn and called in the blood. Whoever it was will probably need an ambulance. After losing that much blood, a person probably won't stay conscious for more than a few minutes. I was prepared to wait there until I heard a scream coming from in the building. At that moment, my instincts kicked in and I ran after it, following the blood trail to the girls' bathroom. The screaming seemed to be coming from there, alongside a banging sound, and I slowly and silently entered. As I peeked in, I see what appeared to be a man in a black hoodie banging against a bathroom stall, and the screams of a girl coming from within. Seeing this, I switched to my taser and I crept slightly closer. And while I'd normally give an order of surrender, in this case, I didn't think it was warranted. He was bleeding badly and clearly trying to hurt a civilian. I'd use a gun if it wouldn't get me in trouble or endanger the girl. So, taser it was. With an easy shot to the back, the man spasmed and fell to the ground, convulsing a little bit. I removed the darts from him before putting him in cuffs, and then reporting the situation. Within minutes, the backup arrived alongside an ambulance. While I wish that this is where the story ended, there is one last thing that happened which concerns me. According to reports, when the perpetrator did wake up, he immediately grabbed the nurse and vomited into her mouth before going limp. And the man passed away almost immediately afterwards. Cause of death? Autopsy said that there was a major damage to his spinal cord and brainstem. What caused it? Well, they're still investigating. And while they were investigating, the nurse also passed away. Same cause of death. According to her co-workers, she seemed to be acting odd, like she was a different person. The only person who was present at that time was her teenage son. Apparently, she puked on him too, only to drop dead within the same minute. While no one knows what happened, I have a theory. Looking back at the footage of the perpetrator's death, just as he was puking into the nurse's mouth, I noticed something. If you look ever so closely for a split second, it looked like something was wriggling into her mouth. The nurse fell over and seemed to convulse for a second, which doesn't seem too strange given what just happened. But what if it wasn't? Update. The nurse's son is dead. Same way, same circumstances. Officials have called it some sort of new sickness, but as far as I'm concerned, it's something much worse. I just hope that it decides to leave our town and go somewhere else. It was the summer of 1987, and I was 17 years of age when this experience occurred. I lived at my aunt's house, and I decided that I was going to visit my sister. We both lived in the same city that summer. My sister at that time was married and had 2 small children, and she and her family lived in a house with an attached farm to it. The best way that I could describe this house is like an old-fashioned redwood farmhouse, and though it was in the city, it was surrounded by trees, and in the back were a couple of old shacks and chicken coops, but it didn't have any chickens. Although my sister had a front door, they always preferred everyone to use the side door. And as you walked in, immediately to the right was a doorway that led to a long, narrow, and dark, creepy closet. And just inside the doorway and to the right was a bathroom. And towards the end of the closet was another door that led to a barn. The side door opened into the kitchen though, and immediately there was a dining room, and if you walked in there, to your right, there would be a big old living room, and then another right would be a bedroom and another bathroom. Just walking into that place gave me the creeps. I don't know why at that time, but it just really did. My sister never really told me anything about the history of the house, and I don't know if she didn't know or just thought nothing of it and didn't mention it to me. Well, like I said, on this particular day, I went to go and visit her. While she was doing her laundry, I decided that I would go and explore because I was getting bored. Little did I know at that time that my boredom and my curiosity could have never prepared me for what I was about to see, and it would leave an image in my mind that I would never forget. Anyway, after using the restroom, I walked down the long dark closet to the door that would lead me outside into the barn. And for some reason, as I approached that door, I went to open it, and then I just froze. Something told me not to open that door, but I didn't listen to my gut feeling. As I opened the door, you had to step down 2 steps, and I did this. I turned, and for whatever reason, I looked up into the loft, and there was a guy up there with a rope in his hand. It was almost like he was staring right into my soul, even though I knew it wasn't me he was looking at. But either way, I just stood there frozen, unable to say anything. I watched as the guy put the rope around his neck, and then he jumped. I heard the rope tighten and the sickening snap of his neck as I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought it was going to explode. I don't remember how long I was there, watching the ghost just swinging. For reference, I am a female, and this happened to me in the summer of 1984 when I was 13 years old. Well, anyways, that summer, my parents sent me and my twin sisters to camp for the summer. For obvious reasons, I will be changing the name of the camp to Camp Up High. Camp Up High is located in the Angeles National Forest near Mount Wilson, which is 52 miles from Long Beach, California. Well, anyways, we get to the camp and are introduced to our camp counselors and then given a tour of the camp. Well, I immediately fell in love with it because it was so beautiful, but my twin sisters didn't seem too happy. Later that night after dinner, the counselors gathered all of us together around a campfire to tell stories, roast marshmallows, and make s'mores. About a week after getting to camp and during dinner, one of the counselors named Running Rooster told us that the next day we would be getting up early and going on a hike to another campground where we would spend the night. Getting up the next morning and after breakfast, we all went to our cabins and gathered up our camping stuff and then met up with the counselors at the snack barn. The counselors made sure that we were all there, and then we started off on our hike. I remember being excited because I have always loved the outdoors. Now, mind you, this was during the 80s, long before cell phones and social media, so hearing stories about cryptids, skinwalkers, and dogmen were unheard of. I just remember how beautiful everything was, and the smell of the fresh pine trees and the sounds of nature echoed around me. I also remember while walking on the trail that there was a group of trees to my left. I then heard a sound that kind of startled me at first, but when I looked, I realized that it was just a group of soldiers on the ground for a training mission. While standing there and watching them, it dawned on me that I was way behind my group, so in a hurry to get caught up with them, I didn't notice how quiet everything became around me. After crossing a small stream to catch my breath and realizing that it was too quiet, I started getting scared because I still didn't hear or see my group. Well, that's when I first heard something moving diagonally to the right of me, and that's also when I smelled whatever it was, and darting my head to the right, I saw it. It was standing half behind one of the pine trees. In shock, I was unable to move or scream. I just stood there staring at whatever it was. Whatever this creature was, I know it had to stand at least 7 to 8 feet tall. All of its body was covered in semi-long brownish hair except for its face. It almost looked human, but its arms were longer than they should have been, and its hands were huge. This thing was large and its legs didn't look like it could hold its weight. I remember how god-awful it smelled, and I almost wanted to puke. After standing there for what seemed like forever, I heard my name being called off in the distance, breaking me out of my trance. I took off running towards the group, and that's when I realized that whatever that was chasing me. Hearing my name again, I ran even faster because I just wanted to get the hell away from it and be safe. And after getting back with my group, I realized that it had stopped chasing me. So I started calming down. And that's when one of my sisters asked what was wrong with me, and I just told her, "Oh, it's nothing." I don't know what I saw that day, and I still don't. But I can tell you that it was not natural nor human. It is something that I have never forgotten and is forever burned in my memory. Please forgive me, as I am not the best storyteller. But when I was a kid, the house my mom and stepdad lived in was indeed haunted. Story goes that the kid that lived there before my stepdad killed his parents. These are my experiences and what all happened in that house. Not all of them were freaky or cruel. Some were actually kind gestures. And my mom and I lived in that house until I was 12. So right outside my mom's room, there were 3 rusty red finger streaks, the same color as dried blood, down the wall. Then a couple more on the wall, then also down the hall. They would paint over it, and it would come back. Paint over, come back, paint over, and come back. That's how it was. We would also wake up to cabinet door slamming. One night, my mom woke up to them slamming. She walked out to the kitchen thinking someone may be robbing us, and she saw a shadow on the wall. She flipped on the light, and there was nobody there. One early morning, after my stepdad had left for work, someone sat down on my mom's bed and then covered her up with a blanket. One time, I got locked in the bathroom. Since then, I would make my mom wait outside the bathroom when I was in there. Someone grabbed my cousin's ankles one night, and my mom had touch lamps, and they would flicker and turn on and off. And one morning, the dishwasher had been ran and the dishes were clean. Stuff would also go missing all the time. The stone in my mom's wedding ring fell out, and it was lost. When we moved out of the house, my mom went back in to get her keys to leave for the new home, and the stone was sitting right next to her keys. Now, my mom had left my dad for the neighbor, and my dad still lived in the house across the street. I know, it's kind of messed up, but he would watch the house when my stepdad and mom went out of town. He would see the lights turn on and off at night sometimes. I was pretty young when this all happened, but I remember them pretty vividly. And to this day, I don't watch haunting movies. They mess me up pretty bad. I watched The Conjuring, and I couldn't sleep for a week. In the summer of 1989, just before I turned 6 years old, my family and I lived in a small duplex at the end of a cul-de-sac. We'd lived there since I was about 2 years old. Our duplex was set back a ways and there was a long driveway between our door and the street. My mom was close friends with a family that lived directly across the street. Their single-family house had a small front yard with a gate that opened up to a walkway that led you to the porch steps. Up the steps was a nice porch that ran the length of the front of the house, and of course the front door. They were an older couple whose youngest daughter, who we'll call Irene, still lived with them, and they had custody of their young granddaughter due to some issues that their oldest daughter had with drugs. Irene was a year older than my sister, and their granddaughter was just a little younger than me. It was nice to have someone closer to my age to play with. My sister is 4.5 years older than me and was too cool to hang out with a little kid, and she was just happy to have an older friend to hang out with too. We were always going over to each other's houses, and they were more like extended family than friends. So when the older couple asked my mom to keep an eye on their house while they went out to dancing, of course, she obliged. Irene was babysitting the granddaughter, as she had done several times before, and they just wanted someone else that they trusted to keep an eye out. They had 3 big aggressive dogs out back that only liked the older couple and would attack anyone else, so there wasn't much worry of intruders. It was a good neighborhood, and back then, neighbors had keys to each other's houses, even though most rarely locked their doors. Every 20 or so minutes, my mom would call their house just to check in. It was the usual, "Are you two okay? Is there anything you might need? I'll check back in a little while." And then she would hang up. Now, before we proceed with the story, I should probably mention that their house was always very dark and had the feeling that the darkness wasn't just a lack of lighting, but more like a complete saturation of the shadows within it. It was always cold, even in the peak of summer in New Mexico. I know it sounds weird, but I'm sure that some or most of you can relate. Seems we've all had an experience with a place like that at some point. After some time went by, my mom picked up the phone and dialed their number. It just rang and rang. Now, call waiting had just become a thing earlier that year, but not everyone had it, and none of us on that little dead-end street did. So, my mom grew concerned, but she hung up and decided to wait a few minutes and try again. Maybe they were using the bathroom, or maybe eating and couldn't get to the phone on time. As soon as she set the phone on the receiver, it rang. She jumped because she hadn't expected it. She lifted it up and answered, "Hello?" Static came from the other line, and it was loud. I remember her yanking the phone from her ear and shouting into it, "Hello? Irene, is that you?" The static seemed to get louder, and then more quiet, and then back to loud. I remember hearing the faint sounds of a child crying and a girl shouting back, but the static was too loud. My mom shouted into the receiver, still holding it about a foot from her face, "I'm going to call you right back. There's a bad connection." And she put down the phone onto the receiver. I was standing a few feet away watching this. As she picked it up to redial, something caught my eye from out of our living room window. The window faced the driveway that we shared with a few other duplexes, and the street, and ultimately the front of their house. I walked about 3 steps over to that window and looked across the street. Now remember, I'm almost 6 years old, so things don't immediately sink in for me at this age as being odd or out of the ordinary. I'm just seeing what I'm seeing. And as I'm watching, the lights in the windows of the 2 front rooms are blinking wildly on and off, and the porch light was too. My mom was on her 3rd redial and putting her shoes on when I heard Irene answer in a frantic state. I couldn't hear her exact words, but she was hysterical, and my mom just shouted over her to say that she was going over there. She hung up and told me to lock the door after her. She shouted to my sister, who was listening to cassettes back in our room, that she would be right back. She got the keys for their house, and I followed her to the door, where I promptly locked it after she stepped out. I went back to the window, and I watched her run across the driveway and across the road, through a little gate at their front yard, and up the walkway and up the steps of the porch. The blinking stopped as soon as she crossed the threshold of their gate, with only the porch light remaining on. I watched as my mother tried desperately to open the wrought iron screen door, and I could see her struggling with the doorknobs and alternating between fiddling with the key and yanking at the door and banging on it. She was standing with her legs apart to brace herself as she yanked and pulled on the door. This is when something at the bottom step of the porch caught my eye. A black shadow on all fours climbed out from the bushes that grew on either side of the porch steps. I was terrified, as I knew their 3 dogs were very vicious to anyone besides the older couple. But something was off though. Most dogs run and attack. This didn't seem like any normal dog. It moved like fog, gliding stealthily up the steps toward the front door, as if to avoid making a sound. It had bigger shoulders than any dog that I had seen in my life up to that point. And I stood there, staring in horror, waiting to see my mom be attacked by this big black dog. She continued to bang and scream, and that's when it happened. The dog seemed to tiptoe slowly up to my mom and just disappear through her legs and into the door. Like it went right through the wrought iron and the solid wood doors and was just gone. The lights flickered on and off again in the front rooms for a few seconds, and then suddenly, the wrought iron door swung open and my mom fell back, nearly rolling backwards down the steps. She got up and went to work on getting the wood door open. It opened easier than the first, and then she disappeared inside, leaving the door open and was gone for a good few minutes. In that time, the inner wood door moved back and forth, but not like wind was pushing it. It seemed very choppy, almost glitchy if you could imagine that. I could see lights flickering on and off inside of the house, and I thought I saw a dark figure with massive shoulders standing upright in the doorway when it had reopened all the way. I was staring so intently that when my mom emerged suddenly, carrying the granddaughter with Irene following right behind, it startled me. They ran across the road and up the driveway, and I hurried over to unlock the door for them. The girls were crying when everyone stumbled into our house. My mom was trying to calm down the granddaughter and trying to get answers from Irene about what happened. My mom's face was white as a sheet, and her eyes were big. Looking back now, I can register the amount of fear she felt. Irene was going on about how they were in the den at the back of the house, just watching a movie. And then they heard something crash in the front room. There was a large area of wall that was opened up, sort of like a window, between the den and the kitchen. And then, the same thing from the kitchen to the front room, creating a sort of openness from the front area through the house and then to the den. Irene said that when she stood up to look through the front room, she saw a large black figure, wide shoulders that looked more like a beast than a man, standing in the front room. Huge, bigger than any man she had seen, and he didn't seem fully solid. The lamp that lit the front room, its light wasn't completely blocked out by the figure. She could kind of see through it. She screamed and grabbed the granddaughter and ran into the bathroom that was off to the side of the den. She locked the door thinking that it was an intruder and tried calling my mom from the phone in that bathroom. The phone was also a toilet paper holder. Yeah, the 80s was a really strange time. She said that she couldn't get through at first, and all she could hear was a deep voice laughing on the line. And when she finally got through, it was laughing so loudly, she didn't know if my mom could hear her shouting for help. This must have been when my mom heard the static. When my mom was trying to redial and there was no answer, it was because Irene heard banging on the bathroom door. This bathroom had another door that led into one of the bedrooms, and even though she was terrified, Irene led the little one into that room. She then locked the door to the bathroom and ran across to lock the other room that led to the hallway. She grabbed the phone from the bedside table and took it to the closet and stacked several suitcases in front of her and the little one, putting themselves as deep into the corner of that closet as possible. When my mom finally got through to them, as she was putting her shoes on to go over there, Irene was hysterically trying to relay her message of fear through gasped and mumbled phrases. My mom just told her that she was on her way and then laughed. Irene said that the whole time they waited in that closet, she could hear snarls and growls and things breaking in other rooms. The dogs in the backyard were going wild, barking. She heard the door of the bedroom open and something huge slowly walking toward the closet. She said the footsteps sounded loud and heavy. Just then, the doorbell rang and she heard banging on the door. It was my mom desperately trying to get in, and this seemed to stop whatever was coming for them, but she was too terrified to move from the closet, so they waited until my mom got into the house. She said that it seemed like forever. My mom had gone into the house yelling for them and flicking lights on, and when she got into the room they were in, they called her and she dug them out of the closet and brought them back. My mom never saw anything while she was there. No man, no beast. I had been quiet the whole time, just listening. I was searching for answers in her story, and when I couldn't find any, I began waiting for my turn to speak. My mom got up and went to get them some water and some tissues to wipe the tears from their faces. As they sat there sniffling, I decided that it was my turn, and I asked, "But what was that big dog? And why did it go through the door?" "What do you mean?" My mom replied. She had stopped walking midway back to the sofa where the girls were sitting. I was still standing in the middle of the room, and I pointed out of the window to their house. "Well, when you were on the porch fighting with the door, I saw a huge black shadowy dog walk out of the bushes and then up the porch steps and through your legs. It disappeared through the door. How did you not see it? It was right there." I was pointing more intently at the window in the direction of their house now. And once more, the blood rushed from my mom's face and she nearly dropped a cup of water. I don't know what you mean. The dogs were in the backyard. I heard them barking," she replied, sounding as if her throat was as dry as the desert we live in. And by this point, I was practically jabbing my pointer finger towards the house with every other word. "It wasn't shaped like those dogs. Its shoulders were too big and it moved like smoke. It went right through your legs, Mom." And I became frustrated. The look on her face changed as she stared at me. Why was she avoiding it? "What was it?" I demanded vehemently. And how did it crawl straight through the door?" She stood there frozen, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know if she was afraid that I might be seeing things or that she went into a dark house right after that thing. She finally blinked, a single tear rolling down as she quickly wiped away, and she handed the girl some tissues and a cup of water. She turned to me and looked at me in a way that I'll never forget and simply said, "You saw nothing. You imagined it." And she continued consoling the girls. They called the bar that the older couple had gone dancing at and had them paged. When they called back, my mom explained what had happened and they rushed home, police arriving soon after. The police searched the whole house and found no one there. No sign of forced entry, no person or people, no dark shadows, but there were broken knickknacks and decorations throughout the house, a few picture frames knocked off the walls. But in the end, they assumed that it was somehow an intruder, and they said that my mom must have scared them when she came for the kids, and since she left the door wide open when they ran back to our house, the suspects most likely snuck away. Nothing was missing from the house. Since that day, I only mentioned to my mother one other time of seeing dark shadow people. She looked at me the same terrified way that she had that night, and I never brought it up again. I hate that look. It made me feel wrong or bad, and I started thinking about all the absurd, unexplained things that I'd seen for as long as I can remember. My earliest memories started around 3 years old, and I can remember lots of things, like eyes staring back at me from dark corners, faces seemingly to melt momentarily, dark shadows during broad daylight, things disappearing and reappearing in other rooms, or days later, or things moving in my peripheral vision. But I never knew that other people didn't see this stuff too, until that day. I'm an adult now, and I still fear the dark. I almost always have that feeling that something is watching me, but now I hesitate to look back. I fear what I might see. That scares me, knowing since I was 6 years old that I shouldn't have seen that stuff at all. That hasn't stopped me from having dozens of other terrifying experiences and still seeing things that my eyes can't explain.
Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.